Hi, I'm Denise Robb, and I'm a professor of political science, and I'm also a volunteer with Pasadena for Rent Control and the Just Cause Evictions campaign.
Why do you think rent control is important to this community?
Rent control is so important to every community, not just this community, but this is where I live, so this is a beginning. I used to live in Los Angeles, where we have rent control, and only for older buildings because of the Costa-Hawkins Act. We have rent control for buildings that are built before 1995, and it just made a huge difference. I was living in Los Angeles in a rent-controlled apartment when I was 18, and it's the only way I was able to survive. It only went up maybe 2% a year because Los Angeles has really good rent control for old buildings. But then I noticed they were tearing down all the old buildings to build new buildings so they would be free of rent control. And we had hundreds of senior citizens literally have nowhere to go, or they had to go into nursing homes. So it's so important. Now, if we're going to talk about Pasadena, Pasadena is almost 60% renters. 70% are African American, 68% are Latinx. And rent went up 32% between 2012 and 2018. So that's a huge amount. Incomes are not going up 32% in that time. Most people are lucky if they get a raise, and if they do get a raise, it's usually a 1 or 2% maybe cost of living raise, but it's not going to bring them up to 32% more in 6 years. So we have hundreds of homeless people, and it's growing every day. More than half renters spend 50% or more of their income on rent. I can speak about my brother who lives nearby. He's on disability. He gets about $1,000 a month. His rent is $875. That gives him $125 to cover utilities, food. He just got food stamps, but he's almost 70, and he didn't get any food stamps until he was maybe 65, and he didn't qualify for all kinds of different bureaucratic reasons, but that's $125 a month in California to live on once you've paid your rent. And if he didn't have family to help him, and a lot of people don't, I just don't know what he would do. So the disabled seniors on a fixed income, you're on a fixed income, you're not getting a raise every year. This is it. And you hopefully will live to be, 80, 90, 100. But you have to be able to live. You don't want to be homeless at 90 years old. So there are so many reasons why we need rent control. Just to have people have a place to live and not become homeless is probably the biggest one. It was awful. I was thinking of this old man who was a veteran, and all his stuff was on the ground. And I was running for city council at the time, because we never have tenants on the city council. And I was just walking around the neighborhood campaigning, and this man was just standing there with all his stuff. He said his landlord had thrown him out because he didn't get out fast enough. And I just lost it. And the people with me went, let's start filming. And so they brought in a camera, and they brought in the press, and we did a whole press conference, and it was just right about what I was talking about anyway, which is they're tearing down buildings and throwing out old people who have sacrificed their lives for the country. And it's funny, it's like 30 years, and the way we treat veterans in this country, it's disgusting.
What rebuttals do you have for the common arguments against rent control?
Well, I thought of the arguments that people have told me, and one of them is, it's better to build more housing. It's better to build more housing. Well, it could be better to build more housing if we were building lots and lots of affordable housing. We have a state mandate to build 9,000 more units in Pasadena soon. We're nowhere near that. And generally when they build new units, what they do is they build 100% luxury housing. You see a lot of these beautiful homes with pools and weight rooms, and they're great. But they're like $3,500, $5,000 a month. I always wonder, like, who could even afford this? And if you could, why aren't you buying a house? Because houses are even more expensive. Or they have requirements in cities that you have to build 15 or 20% affordable. Well, that's nice, except that means 80% are unaffordable or 85% are unaffordable. So we're just becoming, a place that will have lots of empty housing or just rich people living there. So yes, if you made a mandate to build 9,000 affordable units, that would have an economic effect that would be positive. But even if we did and we don't, by the time that happens, it'll there won't be humans left on the earth. So I think what we need to do is have rent control now, because we're in a desperate situation, and we have been for a long time. It's just getting worse.
Could you describe a couple of stories of people you know of that have been evicted or moved out of Pasadena because they can no longer afford to live here?
Oh, yes. Sadly, I know a lot of people. I just visited my friend in Reno. And by the way, same thing is happening there. Her house is now worth almost double from when she moved there about 10 years ago. She was living in Pasadena. She got married. She had 2 kids, and she just couldn't afford to live here anymore. So she started looking in other states. And at the time, Reno was very affordable. So they were able to get an apartment and then eventually a house. But it's completely unlivable in terms of her finances, even though they both have good jobs and they're both, work very hard. But to have 2 children, you really have to make a 6-figure income or more. 7-figure, if would really be ideal to buy a house in Pasadena. My other friend had moved to England with his mother. He's 60 years old, and at 50, he moved back with his mother because he could not afford he was trying to afford just a room in a house, and he didn't want to live in somebody else's house at 50 years old, but he couldn't afford it, and he didn't have a big income. He was a craftsman and very skilled, but he moved back with his mother. And I know a lot of people who are middle-aged who are having to move if they're lucky enough to have a family that has a home. Sometimes their parents don't have a home. I have another friend who they converted the garage so that he would have a place to live. So this is a serious, serious issue. I've lost quite a lot of friends. I was the president of our PTA at Hamilton Elementary School up until a few months ago. And during the pandemic, many of our parents had to leave Pasadena because they weren't working as much, and they were working from home. And a lot of them said, if I'm going to work from home, why don't I just move to Illinois or Georgia or Texas or Florida, where I can get a much cheaper place and have the same job? And so that's what happened. And our enrollments, I'm sorry, there's one more thing I want to talk about is our enrollments. PUSD, 49% of the kids go to private school. So that's already one problem. And that's a whole other interview. It has to do with racism and the history of busing and segregation in Pasadena. But 49% of the parents send the kids go to private school. But then you've got the rest in public school. It's not affordable to live in Pasadena. So then you lose all of the middle income and low income families because they can't afford to live in Pasadena anymore. So they can't take advantage of our wonderful free PUSD public schools.
So what's your story? Describe whether you're a renter or a homeowner and why rent control is important to you.
Well, So I'm an activist and I belong to a lot of political organizations and my union at work. And I was a renter for 28 years when I moved to Los Angeles. And because I saw all these homes being torn down and elderly people living on the street, I formed an organization called the Miracle Mile Action Committee in mid-Wilshire area. And we were active for over 20 years. We helped get a moratorium on throwing people out for renovations and then jacking up the rent to, they would double the rent. They lowered it to 10%. And all kinds of campaigns. We were very active. We were on the news. We were always in front of buildings with people having their belongings thrown out in the street. And I have not forgotten what it was like to be a tenant. The indignity of the way people were treated. And I own a home now. And so I inherited a home when my mom and dad died. And so I keep the rents about half what they should be, according to my family, what they should be, half the market rate. And I was at a family gathering a few months ago and my cousin said, why don't you double the rent? And I said, why? I mean, the house is paid off, right? I paid it off. My mom paid part of it and then I paid the rest when she died. And she said, yeah, but you could have so much more money. And then you could donate it. I said, but I could provide affordable housing. I do provide affordable housing to one family. It's one family. It's not a lot. And I'm a homeowner. I own a home in Pasadena. And this is all luck. The only way you can own property, white privilege and luck. These are the two main things. I was very lucky. Even though we were dirt poor, my aunt bought us a house. And so I inherited a house. And then I married a man whose mom had just died. And so he inherited money to buy a house. We didn't save up and scrimp and save. We're teachers, right? We didn't scrimp and save and get enough money to buy a house. We just were lucky. And most people don't have that much luck, right? And then, of course, it's a whole other segment, right? But white privilege doesn't have to, you don't have to feel guilty. Just acknowledge the fact that African Americans couldn't inherit property because they weren't allowed to own property. And then they were redlined out of good property. So this is an ongoing thing. And even in 2022, this isn't going to change right away. This is going to take a long time. So yeah, rent control is the least we can do. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a good drop.
Did you want to talk any more about any of that?
Just that I've been involved with the Democratic Party, and this is a big issue for the Democratic Party generally. We tried to get rid of the Costa-Hawkins Act through a ballot initiative in California, and I'm sure you know, it didn't pass, but we have to keep trying. There's so much more work to do. That's the great thing about activism. It's a growth industry. You never run out of work. You never go like, well, that's done. When you could be 100 and still doing this, but I think go down fighting. Don't give up. Never give up. I tell my students that all the time. I said, you want this instant gratification. You want to have things just happen. They're used to that with TikTok and everything. But sometimes you do something that might not happen, but you know what? Your kids or your grandkids might benefit from it. So like Native people, think about the 7 generations in the future. Think about the 7 generations in the future. Whatever you do, it might make a difference in 100 years, but at least, you've participated in that change. And this is a great change for Pasadena.